Hello again, I'm James Mast, and I'm glad to be with you in part 4 of this December's Salt and Light series on power and vulnerability, which is entitled this part, The Holy Family Becomes Refugees. And the scripture that is focused on in part 4 of this unit comes from Matthew. And it includes his account of Herod's brutal efforts to kill Jesus. Basically, when Herod's scheme to pinpoint the exact location of Jesus through the wise men fails, he goes to plan B, which is to kill every male child under 2 in the local area, on the off chance that one of them might be Jesus. Remember back when I was calling Abimelech's violence brutal in part 1 of this series? Well, yeah, I think Herod's got him beat on savagery here. I mean, kids, absolutely brutal. But Jesus gets away. And he gets away because Joseph has another powerful dream. And this time, an angel of the Lord tells him to go to Egypt with his family and wait there until Herod dies. And so that's what they do. And I have to imagine that there were other families fleeing too at the time who were fearful of Herod and the Romans. Sometimes we can get the image of the Holy Family traveling alone on a road to Egypt, but I imagine that it was actually probably a long line of people trying to escape violence. Does that detail matter? I don't know. I just know what I would do if I had a 2-year-old boy and I was living in the area at the time. I would probably be hitting the road as well. And so Joseph, Mary, and Jesus become refugees. I don't know about you, but for me, there are so many thoughts generated by this story. And because of that, I would begin with an open opener. I would just invite people in the group to share what comes to mind for them in response to the story. The truth is that I often have about 5 questions prepared after my pastor gives a sermon when I'm leading second hour, and I rarely get to all of them. And sometimes I get to none of them because the group is self-generating so much good stuff. And I see that as a good thing. If people are engaging with the material and with each other, my advice is just to support it. And sometimes it can be helpful to add an extra ingredient into the discussion. And if I wanted to add something extra for this particular discussion, I think I would help people try to connect more deeply with the refugee status of Jesus' family. Something that comes up for me on a personal note is that many years ago, my wife Jane left Russia with her mother and grandmother after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they did that using Jewish refugee status, actually. And there are many stories that are part of that experience for her and the family. And it was something that profoundly shaped who she was as a person, which for me has always made conversations about refugees more relevant since I'm married to one, actually. If I was leading a group, I might share this part of my family story, and then I might make the observation that for many of us, there was a time in our family history in which people immigrated from one country to another. I might ask, what immigration stories do you have in your history? Was there ever a time in your life in which you left a place because it was dangerous? It might also be interesting to ask people a question like this. What would it take for you to leave a community? To leave your home even? What would be the tipping point for something like that? Of course, this is a thought experiment, but it just might be helpful when it comes to generating empathy for people in refugee situations, and also for connecting with the early life of Jesus. Something else that I've been thinking about related to this story is the way that Jesus, as a person, must have been shaped by his family's exile to Egypt. In the field of developmental psychology, there's much recognition that the early life experiences of a person have a powerful shaping influence on how that person develops and who they become. I can't help but wonder, how did Jesus' early life experience as a refugee shape who he was as a person? Could it have made him more sensitive to in-group, out-group dynamics? I wonder, when his family arrived in Egypt, what challenges did they face? Who were the first to offer his family a seat at the table? Who were the first to close a door on them saying, "You aren't from here," which I imagine could have happened if they were going to a different place. Of course, we cannot know many of these things, but I do think it's worth our imaginative energy. Why? Because as we try to shape our own lives to be like the life of Jesus, it means something to put ourselves in his shoes. or his sandals. I don't actually know what kind of footwear he had, but you get my point. One time at a church mental health seminar, I was asked an interesting question during the Q&A time. I was asked, do you think there are problems that are specific to Mennonites? And it was a great question. I hadn't really thought about it before that. And I couldn't help but think about the way in which Mennonites are communities that are highly collectivistic, which means that the cultural priorities tend to be about the group, like group cohesion or consensus or uniformity, and not so much about the priorities of the individual. And there are many ways in which this cultural tendency is a strength, especially in a relational, fragmented time such as this, as I think of it. But I think one of the vulnerabilities embedded in a collectivistic culture is the way that it can be hard for outsiders to enter into the group. If I was making this point, I might go on to ask the group questions like these. Can a group's search for unity ever become a problem? How has your community dealt with people who aren't originally from there? Which is a kind of a way of asking, how has your faith community responded to immigrants? Even if that just means people coming from a different congregation at times. How has your community responded to people of other faith traditions even, not just Christian? Again, these are just the sorts of things that come up for me while reading this part of December's Salt and Light program. And with that, I just want to say goodbye and thank you for listening. And it's been a privilege to share my thoughts in this December's Salt and Light program. It's been fun too. May you all have fruitful conversations with this rich curriculum. Thank you.